Begins in 1976 in the village of Semarang. A group of children sets out to play when Abdi's father reminds him to be home before sunset. Later, Abdi is seen playing with his friends, but as evening falls, the children leave, except for Abdi and Tris, who continue playing. Tris kicks the ball into the fields, and night falls as they search for it. They hear a female voice calling their names. Noticing movement in the field, curiosity gets the better of them. They step forward to investigate, and to their horror, they see a girl standing there, clutching their ball. The girl turns to leave, and Tris chases after her, insisting that it's his ball. Abdi runs after him, calling his name, but freezes witnessing the girl smashing Tris' head with a stone. The girl turns to him, and he flees in terror, calling his father for help. Afterward, he leads the villagers to the spot, but Tris is nowhere to be found. Only his blood is scattered around. Then, a man calls out to them, and they all rush toward the river, where they discover Tris's lifeless body on a rock. The next morning, Tris's father accuses Abdi of killing his son, but Abdi insists that it was a girl who smashed Tris's head. Sabdo arrives and tells Abdi that he believes him, stating that Sumala is still here. The villagers are confused upon hearing this name, prompting Sabdo to explain that Sumala is a devil's child and that it all began 29 years ago. One of Soejiman's uncles tells him that his uncle and aunt have already given most of their land for the area's development. He adds that if he is willing to do the same, they can still draft an agreement, allowing him to receive a partial profit from the factory that will be built. Soejiman refuses to sell the land, but his uncle insists the land belongs to the Hasankara family. Handing Soejiman a set of documents, he explains that he has already taken care of the permits and advises him to read them carefully. Soejiman's wife Lastri arrives and tells his uncle that if they had informed them of their visit, they could have prepared rooms for them, but uncle says he won't be staying long and that Soejiman knows why he is there. Lasti tells them to enjoy themselves before walking away, and Soejiman asks his uncle to get to the point. The uncle taunts, "If only my wife were like Lastri. In 11 years of marriage, I would have had 8 children by now, securing the rights to the land. So whether it happens now or later, without a will, I can still claim all of the land that belongs to the Hasankara family." Later, Soejiman asks Lastri where she was that morning, and she replies that she went to get a herbal drink for her womb. Soejiman tells her to find another way, but she asks for more time. She then questions why he won't let her talk to his uncle. At this, Soejiman becomes angry, stands up, and prepares to leave. She tries to stop him, but he asks if she doubts his ability to stand up to his uncle. She clarifies, but he insists the estate is his hard-earned inheritance and refuses to give it up. He then coldly tells her to take care of her womb, reminding her of his parents' wish for a child, and if she fails to give him an heir by next year, he will take another wife. Later, Lastri hears 2 men talking about an old lady called Tukina, who can make people pregnant. Lastri visits Tukina, who warns her that she practices black magic and that the ritual Lastri must perform is a serious matter, as it will bind her to her master. When Lastri asks who her master is, Tukina replies, "The devil." She then tells Lastri that if she goes through with it, she can bear 2 children at once. Desperate, Lastri agrees, and Tukina explains that one child will be beautiful and kind, belonging to the human race, while the other will be ugly and wicked, born of the devil's lineage. Once they are born, Lastri and her husband must care for both children until they turn 10. After that, the devil will take the wicked child. However, Tukina warns that if they fail to care for them properly, misfortune will befall their family, growing worse with each passing year. Next, Tukina gives Lastri something to drink, and then steps aside, silently observing her. Suddenly, Lastri's body begins to tremble violently, her limbs contorting in unnatural ways. She then suddenly gets up, balancing on her hands and feet, before turning to Tukina. Tukina rushes to her, places her hands on her belly bump, and declares that this woman now serves the devil. She then presses Lastri's belly bump, causing her to collapse. 2 months later, Lastri gets pregnant, and they name their children Kumala and Sumala. Now, finally, the night comes when Lastri is about to give birth to her children, and during this time, she sees a devil in her room for a moment. After this, she gives birth to the first child, but the midwife Dharmi and maid Zoom are shocked to see that the child is dead. Lastri then gives birth to a second child, whose crying sound echoes throughout the house. Soejuman enters the room to see the baby, but he finds that the baby is dead. He then turns to check on the other child, but he feels disgusted when he sees her ugliness, and Dharmi tells him that the baby is deformed. Grief-stricken and furious, Soejuman returns with a dagger, and Lastri, alarmed, asks, "What is that for?" But he doesn't respond. Instead, he picks up the deformed child, and Lastri pleads with him not to do it. But Soejuman ignores her and plunges the dagger into the child, killing it, and soon after, the other child miraculously comes back to life. Overjoyed, he orders his servant Sukir to announce to the entire village that his heir has been born. 3 years later, Soejuman teaches his daughter Kumala to walk, while his guests whisper about her inability to talk or walk. One remarks that Soejuman's life isn't as perfect as it seems, and another recalls that as a boy, Soejuman was once crippled, but Dharmi's treatment healed him. They took Kumala to Dharmi too, but this time, it failed. 2 years later, as Kumala plays with a bicycle, she nearly puts her finger in the tire, but Lastri stops her, and Kumala lets out a piercing scream. Lastri quickly takes her to her room, but Kumala begins throwing her toys and banging her head on the bed. Soejuman enters the room and orders Sukir to bring a rope. Sukir brings the rope and starts tying Kumala's legs, prompting Lastri to rush to Soejuman, begging him to stop. But he says Kumala is crazy. Soejuman drags Kumala away, and Suam tries to stop him, but Lastri doesn't help and turns her face away. With Sukir's help, Soejuman ties Kumala's hands and locks her in a shed. 3 years later, we see Kumala in the market. There, a group of village boys notices her, and one of them recognizes her, whispering to the others, "That's the crazy girl." Jono holds out a fruit, luring Kumala toward him, but he smears it across her face, and the boys erupt into laughter and begin mocking her. Their cruelty escalates as they start pelting stones at Kumala, and she cries helplessly, but no one steps in to help, not even her parents, who watch from a distance. Instead, Soejuman drags her back to the shed, and Suam begs him to stop. But he ignores her and orders Sukir to bring his whip. Turning to Kumala, he says, "We told you never to leave the house, and yet you went to the market." Sukir returns with the whip, and Suam pleads with Soejuman not to do it, but Sukir restrains her, pulling her aside. Soejuman then begins whipping Kumala, but Lastri just stands there, silently watching. Later, Suam tells Kumala that tomorrow is her 8th birthday, and she made her a present. She holds out a doll, and Kumala's face lights up with joy as she thanks her. Suam then tells her that she loves her so much, and then embraces her, giving Kumala the comfort she has longed for. That night, as the clock strikes midnight, Kumala wakes to the sound of someone whispering her name. She sits up, her eyes scanning the dimly lit room, and suddenly, the wardrobe door creaks open on its own. Kumala stares in confusion, and to her shock, a girl emerges from the darkness within. The girl steps toward her, and Kumala, scared, asks, "Who is she?" The girl replies, "I am Sumala, your twin," and then asks, "Didn't our parents tell you?" Kumala shakes her head and furious. Sumala says, "They killed me because I was ugly." Sumala then jumps onto the bed beside her and tells her, "Don't be afraid, as I won't hurt you, because I love you." She wraps Kumala in a warm embrace and says, "Sisters don't hurt each other, they protect each other." Holding Kumala close, she says, "From now on, day and night will be different." The following night, while Soejuman is working in his office, Kumala plays the piano outside. Annoyed by the sound, Soejuman storms out in anger and slaps her. Witnessing this, Lastri rushes over, but Soejuman orders her to watch her daughter before walking away. After Soejuman leaves, Lastri also walks away, but Suam encourages Kumala to stay strong. Kumala storms into Soejuman's room in anger, and he asks, "What now?" But she remains silent, and his expression shifts to shock as he watches her crippled hands and legs straightening. Suddenly, she lunges at him and drives a pen into his hand. Hearing his screams, Lastri rushes in, and Soejuman shows her his wounded hand, then pulls out the pen, insisting he's fine, but Lastri pulls Kumala aside and asks, "What is the matter with her?" The next day, Kumala is tied and hanged to a wooden cross like a scarecrow, and Soejuman warns her that if she ever talks back to him again, he will punish her like this every day. He then turns and walks away, and when Kumala calls out to her mother, Lastri only turns to her and asks, How could you do that to your father? She then tells her to be quiet before walking away, leaving Sumala alone. That night, during dinner, Soajamin and Lastri watch in shock as Sumala climbs onto the dining table and urinates on it. Furious, Soajamin orders Sakir to bring the rope, who quickly rushes in and tries to pull Sumala down, but she suddenly leaps at him, pinning him to the ground. Lastri intervenes, telling her to stop, but to her horror, she realizes that a demonic entity is controlling Sumala, forcing her to act this way, and Sumala then runs away from there. Lastri and Suam search for Sumala and eventually find her sitting inside a coop, but to their shock, they see her devouring a raw chicken. The next day, Suam asks Sumala why she behaved that way the previous night, to which Sumala replies that it wasn't her, it was Sumala. Confused, she asks, "Who is Sumala?" But Lastri enters the room and asks whose name she'd just say, to which Suam replies, "Sumala." Lastri's expression turns to terror, and she suddenly runs out of the room. Later, Suam notices Lastri sneaking out, and curious, she turns to Sukir and asks where she is going, to which he replies that she said she is heading to the market, but insisted on going alone. Suam turns to her son Sabdo and says she needs to follow Lastri, while also picking up something from the market. She then asks if he can watch over Sumala, and he agrees. Lastri meets a man and asks if he can take her to Tukina, but he replies that she passed away last month. Shocked by this revelation, Lastri panics, and just then, Suam arrives, and Lastri admits she made a mistake. Suam asks what mistake she is referring to, and Lastri confesses that she made a deal with the devil. The following year, Sukir drags Sumala into a shed and begins tying her hands and legs. She pleads for him to let her go, but ignoring her cries, he warns her to stay quiet, or he will slit her throat. He then steps outside and locks the door, and meanwhile, Suam pleads with Sojamin not to lock Sumala in the shed every night. In response, he asks if she wants him to die and explains that the girl attacked him and others, and each night, she is becoming more like an animal. After he leaves, Suam approaches the door and calls out to Sumala. She tells her not to be sad, reassuring her, "I don't care who you are. I will always love you." Saying this, she breaks down in tears, crying helplessly. Later, the village boys call Sumala to play with them, and when she comes out, Jono encourages her to try kicking the ball. But just as she steps forward, he picks it up, and they all start teasing her, calling her crippled. Sumala begins to cry, and Jono tells everyone to be quiet. However, he then smears mud on her face, prompting the other boys to throw mud at her as well. Jono then pushes her to the ground, and Suam rushes over to help her and chases the boys away. But just before leaving, Cario hurls the ball hard at Sumala's head before they all run off. That night, Sumala breaks out of the shed and takes out a dagger from a box. Meanwhile, Supri is drawing water from a well when he notices a bush rustling and hears a female voice calling him to come play. Curious, he asks, "Who's there?" and cautiously approaches with his bucket. He splashes water at the bushes, scoffing that it should teach her to leave him alone. However, as he turns to leave, he hears a girl humming, and when he looks back, he sees Sumala standing there, pulling out a dagger, and to his horror, he notices Sumala standing behind her. Terrified, Supri tries to run, but Sumala catches him and drives the dagger into his back, tearing through him. She then delivers a final stab to his head, killing him. Later, Sucro and Cario are on their way to deliver food to Sucro's uncle when, suddenly, something strikes Sucro's head. They see Sumala on a tree, and she hurls another stone at him, killing him instantly. She then leaps onto Cario, slashing him with her dagger, and as he struggles, she delivers a final stab, killing him. Next, we see the villagers searching for their missing children for 3 days, and that evening, they inform the village chief about their disappearance. He suggests expanding the search to a larger area and coordinating with other village chiefs. He then warns everyone not to let their children out after sunset. Meanwhile, Jono is sitting with the other boys when Sumala suddenly opens the door. Shocked to see her, he freezes as she silently extends his ball toward him. She then places it on the floor before turning and walking away. He steps outside with the other boys and asks, "What are you doing?" and then rolls the ball toward her, but the others mock her, taunting that she won't be able to kick it. Sumala picks up the ball and hurls it at Jono before turning to walk away. Enraged, they follow her, but one boy stops them, noticing the dagger in her hand. Jono asks, "Who are you looking for?" But Sumala remains still and silent. Frustrated, he steps closer, but Sumala turns and slashes at him. Another boy rushes in to attack, but she quickly overpowers and kills him instead. Jono strikes her with a stick, while the other boys grab hold of her, but Sumala kicks Jono and then turns on the others, swiftly killing them. Terrified, Jono begs her to stop, but she hurls the dagger at him before rushing forward, knocking him to the ground. The next day, the villagers continue their search and eventually discover the bodies of 3 boys buried beneath a pile of leaves. And they also find Sumala's doll lying nearby. Meanwhile, as Zoom draws water from the well, she is horrified to see blood mixed in it. Panicked, she calls a man to check inside, and to their shock, they discover Supri's lifeless body submerged in the well. Sukir takes Soejiman to the field to show him the dead bodies of the other boys, and to his horror, he sees their severed heads impaled on a wooden stick. Later, the villagers gather at Soejiman's house, accusing him of murdering their sons, to which he asks, "Where is the proof?" A man steps forward and asks, "If it wasn't you, then was it your daughter?" He holds up Sumala's doll, revealing that he found it next to their son's dead body. Soejiman denies Sumala's involvement, but a villager declares that his daughter is crazy. Soejiman steps forward, warning the man to watch his mouth. He then orders the villagers to go home, stating that he will take this matter to the village chief. He then goes to the shed to ensure that when Sumala is locked in there every night, she has no way to escape. However, his attention shifts to some sacks, and when he moves them aside, he is shocked to discover a hole. Stepping back, he insists that Sumala would never do this, and Lastri then reveals that it wasn't Sumala, it was Sumala. She explains that Sumala mentioned the name, and she herself has seen Sumala with her own eyes, who looks exactly like Sumala, but she is not crippled. When he asks why she never told him, she responds that he should have raised Sumala instead of killing her, and this is all his fault. Soejiman asks Sumala if it was Sumala who killed those boys. Sumala hesitates, but when he promises he will not get mad, she admits that it was. She adds, "I told her not to, but she wanted to kill everyone mean to me." He goes to Sakir and orders him to shackle Sumala. Later, Sumala tells Sum that tomorrow is her 10th birthday, to which Sum replies that she remembers, and asks what she wants. Sumala says she wants her to leave immediately, and when Sum asks what she means, Sumala explains that she doesn't want any harm to come to her. She thanks her for always being kind, and tells her that she loves her very much. Next, we see Sum leaving with a heavy heart and tears in her eyes. Her son asks where she is going, to which she tells him that they have to leave the house and that she will explain later. That night, Soejiman visits Kusno, who reveals that his wife made a deal with the devil just to conceive a child. She carried twins, a beautiful human girl, and the other, an ugly child belonging to the devil. He was supposed to raise both of them until they turned 10. After that, the devil would take the ugly girl, and the rest of the family would live happily. Instead, he chose to kill the child, and now the devil is furious. Soejiman asks, what should he do? To which the shaman warns him that tonight Sumala will be completely possessed by Sumala. Soejiman asks if there is any way to save his daughter, to which Kusno explains that they must expel Sumala from Sumala's body, and if they fail, Sumala will be lost forever. He instructs Soejiman to use his dagger to weaken her and bring her to him, and he will perform a ritual to remove Sumala. But if it's too late, he must stab her straight through the heart. Meanwhile, Sumala chases Sukir as he desperately tries to escape, but she hurls a knife at him, stabbing him. She then approaches him, and he begs for his life, but she tells him she is going to slit his throat. Pulling the knife from his body, she adds, she will do it slowly, so it hurts even more. Sukir begs for forgiveness, but she shows no mercy and slits his throat. Later, Lastri steps outside, hearing Sumala playing the piano. She calls out her name, but Sumala turns to her and asks, "Sumala who?" And to Lastri's horror, Sumala raises a knife and starts moving toward her. Terrified, Lastri steps back and catches a glimpse of Sumala's reflection in the mirror controlling Sumala. Panicking, Lastri retreats, only to collide with Sukir's lifeless body, and as it falls to the ground, Sumala continues advancing, forcing Lastri to sprint to her room and lock the door behind her. However, Sumala smashes through the door, taunting Lastri. "Let's play and chop some meat." Desperate, Lastri grabs a chair and hurls it at her, causing Sumala to stumble. After a tense moment, Lastri cautiously checks on her, only to find Sumala now seething with rage. With terrifying speed, Sumala rushes forward and breaks through the door. She then gets up and lunges at Lastri, attempting to stab her, and Lastri fights back, grabbing the blade to stop the attack. But in doing so, her hands are slashed. Sumala then stabs Lastri's leg and drags the blade across it, making her scream in pain. Standing over Lastri, Sumala asks if it hurts, just as it did when she was stabbed, to which Lastri insists she wanted to raise her, but her father killed her. She then accuses Lastri of neglecting Sumala, but Lastri insists she only wanted to protect her. However, Sumala asks if it was for Sumala or herself. Admitting her mistakes, Lastri asks to speak to Sumala, and Sumala briefly releases her, allowing Lastri to apologize. Sumala forgives her, but Sumala suddenly takes control again and says, "But I don't," before severing Lastri's hand and fatally stabbing her. When Soajimin returns home, he discovers Lastri's lifeless body. Overcome with grief, he breaks down in tears, blaming himself for what has happened. Later, as the clock strikes midnight, Soajimin sees Sumala and Sumala in the room. Sumala turns to him, slowly rising to her feet. She moves toward him, pleading for help, but then Sumala shifts her gaze to him and asks, "Did he forget about her?" Panicked, Soajimin grabs the dagger, enraging Sumala, and he watches in horror as Sumala tears open Sumala's body and enters inside her, causing him to stumble back in fear. Now fully transformed, Sumala, possessed by Sumala, glares at him and growls in fury. She then picks up a knife, and Soajimin, overwhelmed with terror, turns to run. But as he rushes down the stairs, his foot twists, sending him tumbling down. Sumala taunts him, becoming a cripple again, but Soajimin forces himself up and flees. He manages to reach the village and gathers the villagers, informing them that his wife has died. They visit Soajimin's house, and the chief asks him what happened, to which he mutters Sumala. The chief asks Sumala did this, and Soajimin clarifies, she didn't, but they need to find her. However, the villagers, believing Sumala is responsible for killing their sons as well, set out to hunt her down. Soajimin searches the fields for Sumala when she suddenly appears before him, only to vanish in the next instant. And then she leaps onto him from behind, knocking him to the ground. Pinning him down, she attempts to kill him, but he struggles and manages to roll her off. Desperate, he grabs a lamp and strikes her with it. However, Sumala gets up smiling, and he swings the lamp again, finally knocking her unconscious. He grabs the knife and attempts to kill her, but stops upon realizing she is his daughter. He then packs her in a sack to take her to Kusno and apologizes to Sumala for everything he did to her. However, Sumala calls him a cripple and says he was humiliated. She reminds him that he was once healed and became perfect, yet now his daughter is crippled. She continues, saying that if he despised how his parents treated him horribly, he shouldn't have treated his daughter the same way. Just as he once longed for his parents' love, his